December 18th, 2015. The quarantine zone in the middle of Manhattan, later known as the Dark Zone, was abandoned by the government and the Joint Task Force. They left behind weapons, equipment, thousands of civilians, and the first wave of division agents. Although it is assumed that the majority of the first wave were killed or went rogue, there are a number that just simply disappeared. What we do know is that some of them managed to escape the quarantine zone and make their way to the outside of Manhattan Island. In this series, we're going to follow these agents and speculate on what happened to them based on their psychological profiles and the location of where their watches and other information was found. Piper Gibson is a private school and Ivy League legacy who switched to emergency medicine after a year's residency in the South Bronx. Piper stays cool under pressure and treats more gunshot wounds than any other doctor in the city. She has pioneered treatment techniques that were later adopted by the Army. Piper is fluent in Spanish and French and is proficient at Krav Maga, of which she has used on multiple occasions in emergency room confrontations. She has repeatedly refused promotion to more administrative positions to keep herself engaged in the ER. She is advocated relentlessly by her patients and will often go beyond the call of duty to secure resources and get them the help they need. On occasion, Piper exhibits a certain sense of entitlement, possibly due to her upbringing. This will often lead to her expecting to get what she wants and when she wants it. And when this isn't achieved, she doesn't take the disappointment well. Piper Gibson's watch and ID was found in the Clinton district a couple of blocks from the Dark Zone. On her way from escaping the quarantine zone, she came across an area completely overrun by the Rikers gang. Also in the area was the Joint Task Force, but they were losing the fight and control of the situation. Being an ER medic specialised in gunshot wounds, she joined up with the JTF to assist in the treatment of their wounded. Eventually they were overrun. The Rikers had a stronghold set up close by, and any prisoners were taken away to be sadistically tortured in the most inhumane ways imaginable. Piper's file was found in a courtyard that became the final resting place for a number of JTF officers that were left butchered and hanging from the surrounding balconies. This area is littered with bottles and cans. It's unlikely that they were killed quickly. There is no sign of Piper Gibson's body, but given the Rikers' reputation in regards to their treatment of government authorities, it's safe to say that Piper's final moments were not pleasant. Jerome Norton is the son of one of the first responders who died at 9/11. 3 years after the tragedy, Jerome enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. Here he found himself a natural marksman, acing sniper school and being awarded a Silver Star for his service in Iran. During his time he was wounded twice in the line of duty, but both times he returned to the field quickly. After military, Jerome had a rough time transitioning into civilian life. Shortly after returning to the United States, he had 2 arrests for being drunk and disorderly. A family member pulled him aside to turn around the situation he was digging himself into. Jerome gave up alcohol and got into a plumber's union apprenticeship, where he's been working on city projects ever since. To the people around him, he clearly misses the camaraderie of military service, and although he claims not to miss the action, most would say that this isn't the case. Jerome has a strong sense of right and wrong, with little room for moral complexity. He strongly believes in honour and duty, but may struggle with situational flexibility. Jerome's watch and ID can be found in the Clinton district, a little over a block away from the quarantine zone. After making his way through Times Square, an area heavily occupied by the Rikers gang, he took refuge in a garage. He only made it a short distance from their position. Perhaps he was injured and unable to go any further. But being a battle-hardened ex-Marine with a crack shot, it's possible that his fate was led down a different path. Ever since Jerome left the military, he's had a bit of a gap in his existence. Years in the surface working hard and playing harder, building relationships that brought him closer to people than his own family. The pride and excellence associated with the Marines that is drilled into their heads daily isn't something that the general public is concerned about. The expectations and perfectionism of the ex-Marines will be a lifelong battle that has to be dealt with. But people are creatures of habit, and leaving a life behind suddenly after years of service can be a challenge for even the strongest among us. Aaron Keener would have picked up on this vulnerability in Jerome's character. Given that the first wave of division agents as a whole felt betrayed by the government when they were left behind in the quarantine zone, it wouldn't have been difficult to manipulate this already vulnerable personality. Keener would only have to point out the fact that they were on their own now, and that they needed to work together if they were to be successful in their mission. The government didn't have the people's best interests in mind, and it was up to them to get the job done. It's possible that Jerome was sent out to investigate Jordan Amherst's apartment, as his watch was only found a block over. It's unknown how this mission went, but given that Keener was always one step ahead of the division, it would be fair to say that Jerome was able to gather the intel that Keener needed to further progress his plans. Gina Esteban has been a priest, an activist, a social worker, and a nurse. She spent 5 years in El Salvador and Nicaragua, working with the poor. After a stint with Doctors Without Borders, Gina opened a clinic in East Harlem and has been devoting herself to helping the young, the sick, and the elderly. Gina is well and truly the Mother Teresa of her time. She is deeply religious and a proponent of non-violence, but does believe that self-defense is sometimes warranted. Gina is also a crack shot with a pistol. Through her assistance with the local communities, she has earned the respect of the local street gangs, and in turn they've started to provide an informal security detail to watch over the clinic. This has led to allegations that she was providing the local gangs with drugs, but this has since been investigated and dismissed. Gina leads through personal magnetism, devotion to the peace, and her patience. This could be seen as a weakness, but she's fiercely protective of those under her watch. Gina Esteban's watch and ID can be found in an apartment building in the Garment district, not far from the dark zone. Gina barely made it a block from the dark zone. This makes sense, as running from the people in need doesn't fit in with her profile. She may have been forced from the quarantine zone by hostiles, but likely had plans to return. When she heard of the issues between the government and the rest of the first wave, she likely shed herself of any allegiance to the Strategic Homeland Division, to avoid all of the politics that was distracting them from what should have been their main priority, protecting the weak. Gina went on to do what she does best, and set out to tend to the forgotten civilians stuck in the middle of this tragedy. Given her location, she was likely to have had some dealings with a Michael Dufresne, who was a nurse that was taking advantage of the current situation, and selling medicine and supplies to the highest bidder. It's also possible, when considering her history, that she was working with the local gangs to help provide the supplies she needed to help the vulnerable citizens of New York. She may have even been a part of the ambush that had Michael kidnapped by the rioters to take his stolen medicine and force him to tend to the sick. Michael was later reluctantly rescued by the second wave division agents. Joe Chavez is an experienced cameraman, spending time in emergency and war zones. He's covered crime, natural disasters, revolution, and war. While in Iraq, he was kidnapped twice, but due to his ability to keep calm under pressure, even under the most difficult of situations, he's able to come out of it unharmed. Joe received the Louisiana Medal of Honor for rescuing a drowning child while filming stories about Hurricane Katrina. It's said that Joe can drive any vehicle imaginable, and has probably done so while out on assignment. Joe is an impulsive individual, and will take chances for the sake of the story. He won't hesitate to put himself at risk, but this isn't to say that he'll risk the life of others, only his own. Joe Chavez's watch and ID can be found in the Tenderloin district, just outside of the dark zone. It could be assumed that Joe escaped the dark zone and immediately headed west, towards Camp Hudson. But given Joe's psychological profile, this is unlikely. Joe may have still left the dark zone in order to gather himself in an area that was less hostile, but given the fact that this was such a unique situation, followed by the government up and leaving the area, meaning that civilians were left to fend for themselves alongside a number of growing hostile factions, this was a story too good to be true, and Joe had a front row seat. Joe didn't straight up turn on the government, and he certainly didn't jump straight into bed with Aaron Keener, at least not straight away. He set himself up to tell the story of the going-ons in Manhattan, New York. Completely unafraid to dive into the restricted areas and approach authorities, Joe wasn't going to go and let anything get between him and getting the story out to the public. It's not completely clear why, but Joe decided that his identity needed to be hidden. This was possibly a result of the first wave agents starting to turn against the government, and him trying to put some space between himself and the first wave rogue agents. Joe goes on to tell the public about the events happening in the city based on either his first-hand observations or information from his sources. This information was often classified or beyond what even the JTF was aware of. Joe Chavez was attempting to be the voice and ears of the city. Could he be the identity behind a character in the division that we've been listening to on and off for the last 2 to 3 years? The true identity of a Mr. Rick Velassi?
Hey, New York, it's your Uncle Ricky. We need to talk.
These are just my theories and speculations based off the story missions, encounters, intel, and the psychological profiles of the agents in question. It's completely possible that they simply died after contracting the virus, or were outright killed by the hostile factions, or even Aaron Keener's crew. I'll be the first to admit that there are a number of different possible outcomes. What I'm really trying to achieve is to open up your mind to the potential and possibilities that the Division story has to offer, and spark discussion within the community. So tell me, what do you think happened to these agents? What theories do you have regarding the Division story? As per usual, I can't finish up a video without thanking some of the many fabulous supporters of the channel, especially Devereaux and Foxy. This has been particularly amazing at this time, as the Division 1 is coming to an end, and understandably people are starting to move on to other titles while they wait for the release of the Division 2, so Division content viewership has dropped dramatically. But these are the people that are ensuring that I continue to push out these sorts of videos until the franchise picks up again. And I'm thankful because I love this game, and I want to continue the hype towards the sequel for as long as I can. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you'd like to jump into a community full of Division geeks like myself, please visit the Discord link in the description. Thanks again, and see you in the next one. Cheers!